Private Emma Rodriguez had always been the last one to finish. Every morning at Fort Mitchell Army Base in Georgia, she would cross the finish line minutes after her fellow soldiers, her lungs burning and sweat dripping down her face. The other recruits would already be cooling down, some even heading to the showers, while Emma was still pushing herself through those final yards. "Here comes Turtle Rodriguez," Sergeant Mike Thompson would announce with a cruel smile as Emma struggled to complete her run. The nickname stuck like mud on boots. Soon, everyone at the base knew her as Turtle, the soldier who couldn't keep up. Emma had joined the army to prove something to herself and her family back in Phoenix. Her father, a decorated Vietnam veteran, had always told her that courage wasn't about being the fastest or strongest, it was about never giving up. But here at Fort Mitchell, surrounded by soldiers who seemed born for this life, Emma began to doubt those words. The worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion, it was the looks of disappointment from her commanding officers and the snickers from her fellow soldiers. During morning formations, she could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to mess up again. During training exercises, squad leaders would groan when they saw her name on their roster. "Rodriguez, you're holding everyone back," Captain James Harrison told her one afternoon after another failed timed run. "Maybe you should consider a different career path. The army needs clerks and cooks too." Emma's face burned with shame, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, I want to be a combat soldier. I can do this." Captain Harrison shook his head. "Wanting something and being capable of it are two different things. Soldier, you're the slowest runner in this entire company. How do you expect to keep up in real combat situations?" That night, Emma lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the quiet conversations of her bunkmates. They were talking about weekend plans, family back home, their dreams of deployment. None of them included her in their conversations anymore. She had become invisible, except when she was being mocked. Her roommate, Private Jessica Walsh, was different from the others. Jessica was everything Emma wasn't: fast, strong, confident. She could run 5 miles without breaking a sweat and could field strip a rifle faster than most of the men. But, unlike the others, Jessica never joined in the cruel jokes. "You know," Jessica said quietly in the darkness, "my grandfather used to tell me that the tortoise beat the hare for a reason." Emma turned toward Jessica's bunk. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes, being slow means you see things others miss. You pay attention to details. You don't give up when things get tough." Jessica's voice was thoughtful. "Maybe being called Turtle isn't the worst thing in the world." Emma wanted to believe her, but it was hard when every day brought new humiliation. During weapons training, she was accurate but slow to reload. During tactical exercises, she made smart decisions but couldn't execute them fast enough. Everything she did seemed to take just a little too long. The breaking point came during a company-wide competition. Teams of 4 soldiers had to complete an obstacle course, solve tactical problems, and finish with a 2-mile run. Emma's team, consisting of herself, Jessica, and 2 reluctant male soldiers named Davis and Martinez, started strong. Emma's careful approach helped them navigate the obstacles efficiently, and her attention to detail solved the tactical problems correctly on the first try. But then came the run. Emma fell behind immediately. She could hear Davis cursing behind her, could see Martinez shaking his head in frustration. By the time they finished, they were dead last. The winning team was already celebrating with cold sodas while Emma was still gasping for breath. "Thanks a lot, Turtle," Davis said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "There goes our weekend pass." Emma felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. She had learned not to cry in front of the others. That night, she seriously considered Captain Harrison's suggestion about finding a different role in the army. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this, after all. But as she lay in her bunk, she thought about her father's words again. Courage wasn't about being the fastest, it was about never giving up. And despite everything, Emma Rodriguez wasn't ready to give up yet. She had no idea that her greatest test, and her chance to prove everyone wrong, was just days away. Weeks later, Fort Mitchell received new orders that would change everything for Emma Rodriguez. The base was selected to participate in a joint training exercise with Fort Stewart, simulating real combat conditions in a dense forest environment, 30 miles south of the base. The exercise, called Operation Thunderstrike, would test soldiers' ability to work under pressure, adapt to changing conditions, and support each other in challenging terrain. Emma's heart sank when she heard the announcement. Combat simulations meant more running, more chances to fall behind, more opportunities for her fellow soldiers to resent her presence. But orders were orders, and 2 days later, she found herself in the back of a transport truck with 20 other soldiers, heading toward the exercise area. The forest was thick with Georgia pine and oak trees, the ground covered with fallen leaves that crunched under their boots. The air was humid and still, making every movement feel like swimming through thick soup. Emma looked around at the other soldiers, all of them seeming comfortable and confident in their camouflage uniforms and heavy packs. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Stone, a tough woman in her 40s who commanded respect from everyone at Fort Mitchell, gathered the soldiers for their briefing. "This exercise will test everything you've learned," she announced, her voice carrying easily through the forest. "You'll be facing simulated enemy attacks, supply shortages, and communication breakdowns. Most importantly, you'll need to work as a team." Emma noticed Captain Harrison standing nearby, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical as his eyes landed on her. She had heard him talking to other officers earlier, questioning why dead weight soldiers were being included in such an important exercise. The soldiers were divided into 4 squads of 5 members each. Emma found herself assigned to Squad Delta, along with Jessica Walsh, 2 soldiers she barely knew named Roberts and Kim, and surprisingly, Sergeant Thompson, the same man who had given her the cruel nickname Turtle. Sergeant Thompson looked at his squad roster and shook his head. "Great," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I get stuck with the slowest soldier on the base." Emma felt her cheeks burn, but Jessica stepped up beside her. "Sergeant, with respect, maybe we should see how the exercise goes before making judgments." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Walsh, I hope you're not planning to babysit Rodriguez through this whole thing. In real combat, slow soldiers get people killed." The first day of the exercise went as badly as Emma had feared. Squad Delta was tasked with reaching a series of checkpoints scattered throughout the forest, gathering intelligence at each location, and reporting back to base camp. Emma struggled to keep up with the pace Sergeant Thompson set, her heavy pack seeming to grow heavier with each mile dot at the 3rd checkpoint, while the others were studying maps and planning their next move. Emma noticed something the others had missed. Hidden among the trees was a small piece of orange fabric, a marker indicating a simulated enemy position that could threaten their planned route. "Sergeant," she called quietly, pointing toward the fabric, "I think we need to adjust our path." Thompson glanced where she was pointing and dismissed it with a wave. "Rodriguez, we don't have time for your overcautious approach. We're already behind schedule because of your pace." But Roberts, a quiet soldier who rarely spoke up, squinted toward the trees. "Actually, Sergeant, I think she's right. That's definitely a marker." Thompson grudgingly changed their route, but his irritation with Emma only grew. When they stopped for a meal break, Emma overheard him talking to the other squad leaders on his radio. "My squad's being slowed down by dead weight," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Rodriguez is going to cost us this exercise." That evening, as the squad set up camp, Emma sat apart from the others, cleaning her rifle and trying to ignore the disappointed looks from her squadmates. She had always been proud of her attention to detail, her ability to spot things others missed, but here in the forest, those skills seemed worthless compared to speed and endurance. Jessica sat down beside her. "You saved us from walking into that simulated ambush today," she said quietly. Emma shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I'm still slowing everyone down, maybe," Jessica said. "But I've been watching you. You see things the rest of us miss, you think, before you act. Those aren't bad qualities in a soldier." The second day brought new challenges. Squad Delta was assigned to a long-range patrol that would take them deep into the forest, far from the main base camp. Their mission was to establish a forward observation post and maintain communication with headquarters for 12 hours. As they moved through the thick underbrush, Emma again fell behind the others, but she also noticed things: broken branches that indicated recent movement, tracks in the soft earth that didn't match their own boots, and most importantly, the subtle signs that they were being followed by opposing forces in the exercise. "Sergeant," she called during one of their brief rest stops, "I think we're being tracked." Thompson didn't even look back. "Rodriguez, save your paranoia for someone who cares. We have a schedule to keep." But Emma's instincts were right. An hour later, Squad Delta walked straight into a simulated ambush that eliminated half their team, including Sergeant Thompson himself. As the casualties were removed from the exercise, Emma found herself looking at Jessica, Roberts, and Kim, the survivors who would have to complete their mission with half their original strength, for the first time since the exercise began. Emma felt a spark of determination. Maybe she was slow, maybe she couldn't keep up with the others' pace, but she was still here, and she was going to prove that being the last one standing sometimes mattered. more than being the first one to arrive. The third day of Operation Thunderstrike brought a twist that no one at Fort Mitchell had expected. What was supposed to be a routine training exercise suddenly became much more serious when word came through the radio that a real emergency had developed 30 miles away. A massive wildfire, sparked by lightning during an unexpected thunderstorm, was threatening the small town of Millerville, Georgia. The town's volunteer fire department was overwhelmed, and the Georgia National Guard units that should have responded were tied up with flooding in the northern part of the state. Fort Mitchell was the closest military installation with the resources to help. Lieutenant Colonel Stone's voice crackled over the radio to all squads. Exercise parameters have changed. This is now a real-world humanitarian mission. All units are to proceed immediately to Millerville to assist with civilian evacuation and fire suppression efforts. Emma felt her stomach drop. A real emergency meant real consequences. People's lives were at stake, and she would be expected to perform at the same level as soldiers who were faster, stronger, and more confident than she was. Squad Delta, now reduced to just 4 members after the previous day's simulated ambush, received their specific orders. They were to establish a supply depot at the town's elementary school, which was serving as the main evacuation center. Their job was to manage incoming supplies, coordinate with local emergency services, and maintain communication with the military units fighting the fire. The 20-mile hike to Millerville was the longest Emma had ever attempted with full gear. Her pack contained radio equipment, medical supplies, and emergency rations, easily 60 pounds of weight that seemed to grow heavier with each step. Jessica, Roberts, and Kim moved at a steady pace, but Emma found herself falling further and further behind. "Come on, Rodriguez," Kim called back to her during one of their brief stops. "People are counting on us." Emma nodded, not wanting to waste breath on words. Her legs felt like lead, and her lungs burned with each breath, but she kept moving. In the distance, she could see a column of dark smoke rising into the sky, the wildfire that was threatening hundreds of innocent people. When they finally reached Millerville, the scene was more chaotic than anything Emma had experienced. The elementary school parking lot was filled with cars, trucks, and trailers, as families evacuated with whatever belongings they could carry. Children were crying, parents were shouting instructions, and elderly residents sat in wheelchairs looking confused and frightened. The mayor of Millerville, a heavy-set man named Bob Tucker, met Squad Delta at the school entrance. "Thank God you're here," he said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "We've got 300 people evacuated so far, but we're expecting twice that many by tonight." The fire jumped the highway about an hour ago. Emma looked toward the horizon and saw that the smoke column had grown larger and darker. The wind was shifting, pushing the fire directly toward the town. Jessica took charge of setting up their communication equipment while Roberts and Kim began organizing the supply depot. Emma found herself assigned to help coordinate the influx of civilian vehicles and assist elderly or disabled evacuees for the first time since joining the army. Emma's careful, methodical approach was exactly what was needed. While others rushed around trying to handle multiple tasks at once, Emma focused on each evacuee individually, making sure they were safe, accounted for, and had what they needed. She helped an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson find her medication in the chaos of evacuation supplies. She organized a group of teenage volunteers to help carry belongings for families with small children. Most importantly, she kept detailed records of everyone who came through the evacuation center, something that seemed unimportant until families started looking for missing relatives. But as the day wore on, the situation grew more desperate. The fire was moving faster than anyone had anticipated, and reports came in that several rural roads were now blocked by fallen trees and debris. Worse, the main supply convoy from Fort Mitchell was delayed by the same road closures that were trapping civilians. By evening, the evacuation center was running low on critical supplies, medical equipment, food for diabetic evacuees, and most importantly, emergency communication batteries that kept their radio contact with firefighting units active. "We need those supplies," Jessica told Emma as they watched their radio equipment's power levels dropping. "Without communication, we can't coordinate rescue efforts or call for help if the fire reaches the school." Emma stared at the radio display showing 2 hours of battery life remaining. She thought about the supply convoy stuck somewhere on blocked roads between Fort Mitchell and Millerville. She thought about the families in the school behind her, counting on the soldiers to keep them safe. And then she thought about something else. During their hike to Millerville, she had noticed old logging roads that branched off from the main highway. roads that were too narrow for large military vehicles but might still be passable for someone on foot who knew where to look. "I think I can get to the supply convoy," she told Jessica quietly. Jessica looked at her with surprise. "Emma, that's a 15-mile hike each way, through forests that might be on fire, and you'd have to carry supplies back." Emma nodded. "I know those logging roads. I saw them on our way here. The convoy is probably stuck on Highway 23, about 15 miles northeast. If I take the old timber trails, I can reach them and guide some supplies back." Roberts overheard their conversation and shook his head. "Rodriguez, no offense, but you're the slowest runner on the base. How do you expect to make a 30-mile round trip before our communications die?" Emma looked around the evacuation center, at the frightened faces of children, the worried expressions of parents, and the tired eyes of elderly residents who had lost their homes to the fire. For the first time since joining the army, she wasn't thinking about proving herself to her fellow soldiers. She was thinking about people who needed help. "Maybe I am slow," she said quietly, "but I don't give up. And right now, that might be exactly what these people need." As darkness fell over Millerville, Emma Rodriguez prepared for the most important run of her life. She had no idea that her journey through the burning forest would finally show everyone, including herself, what she was truly capable of. At 9:47 p.m., with the evacuation center's radio showing less than 90 minutes of power remaining, Emma Rodriguez stepped into the darkness of the Georgia forest. She carried a lightweight pack with water, emergency flares, and a handheld GPS device that Jessica had insisted she take. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked one final time, her voice tight with worry. Emma adjusted her pack straps and checked her compass. "Those people in there are counting on us. I won't let them down." The first mile was the hardest, not because of the physical challenge, but because of the doubt. Emma's mind kept replaying every cruel comment, every disappointed look, every time she had finished last. "You're too slow," Sergeant Thompson's voice echoed in her head. Dead weight, holding everyone back. But as she settled into her steady pace, something remarkable happened. The voices in her head grew quieter, replaced by the rhythm of her breathing, and the steady crunch of her boots on the forest floor. For years, Emma had been trying to run like everyone else, fast, aggressive, pushing herself to exhaustion. Tonight she ran like herself, careful, persistent, aware of every step. The old logging road was exactly where she remembered it. A narrow dirt path that wound through the pine trees like a secret. Her GPS confirmed what she hoped. This route would cut 8 miles off the distance to Highway 23, where the supply convoy was stranded. 2 hours into her journey, Emma encountered her first real obstacle. The logging road was blocked by a massive oak tree that had fallen across the path, probably brought down by the same storm that had started the wildfire. The tree was too high to climb over and too long to walk around easily. Emma studied the obstacle carefully, the way she had been trained to assess tactical problems. She noticed that erosion had created a small gully beside the road, just deep enough for a person to crawl through if they were willing to get dirty. It would add 15 minutes to her time, but it was passable as she emerged from the gully, covered in mud and pine needles. Emma realized something important. Being slow had taught her to look for solutions that others might miss. Faster soldiers might have turned back or tried to force their way over the tree. Emma found the path that actually worked. The third hour brought a more serious challenge. The wind had shifted, and smoke from the wildfire was drifting across her route. The air became thick and difficult to breathe, forcing Emma to cover her mouth and nose with her shirt. Her eyes watered, and every breath burned her lungs. But Emma had learned something during all those morning runs when she had finished last. Gasping for air while her fellow soldiers looked fresh and strong, she knew how to push through discomfort. She knew how to keep moving when her body wanted to quit. She pulled out one of her emergency flares and used its light to navigate through the thickest smoke. The red glow cut through the haze, helping her stay on the narrow logging road when visibility dropped to just a few feet at 1:15 a.m. After more than 3 hours of steady movement, Emma finally heard the sound she had been hoping for. Diesel engines idling in the distance. She quickened her pace, and soon the lights of military vehicles appeared through the trees. The supply convoy consisted of 4 trucks and about 20 soldiers, all stranded on Highway 23 by a massive pine tree that had fallen across the road. The soldiers had been working for hours trying to clear the obstruction, but the tree was too large for their equipment to handle. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the convoy leader, looked shocked when Emma emerged from the forest. "Soldier, where did you come from? What unit are you with?" Emma saluted. despite her exhaustion. Private Rodriguez, Squad Delta, Fort Mitchell. I'm here from the Millerville Evacuation Center. We need emergency supplies, and our communications are failing. Sergeant Santos studied Emma's mud-covered uniform and the compass in her hand. You walked here, through the forest, in the dark? Yes, ma'am, there's a logging road about half a mile back through those trees. It's passable for foot traffic, maybe even for small vehicles if you take it slow. The convoy's medic, a young man named Corporal Davis, looked skeptical. That's a 15-mile hike from Millerville. You made that in 3 hours. Emma nodded. The evacuation center has 300 civilians, including elderly and disabled people. They need medical supplies and communication batteries. I can guide a small team back along the logging road. Sergeant Santos made a quick decision. Davis grabbed the priority medical supplies and extra radio batteries. Johnson, you're with them. Rodriguez, you think you can make it back? Emma looked toward the forest, thinking about the families waiting at the elementary school, about Jessica and the others who were counting on her, about all the times she had been called too slow to matter. Yes, ma'am, I can make it back. The return journey was the true test. Emma was now responsible not just for herself, but for Corporal Davis and Private Johnson, who were carrying 40 pounds of emergency supplies each. Both men were faster runners than Emma, but neither knew the forest paths like she did. Stay close, Emma told them as they entered the logging road. I know where the obstacles are. For the first time in her military career, Emma Rodriguez was leading instead of following. When they reached the fallen oak tree, she showed them the gully route she had discovered. When the smoke thickened, she used her remaining flares to light the way. When Private Johnson stumbled on a hidden route, she helped him up and redistributed his load so he could continue. Rodriguez, Corporal Davis said during a brief rest stop, I've got to ask, how did you know about this road? Emma wiped sweat from her forehead. I pay attention to things, always have. Most people thought it made me slow, but it also means I see details others miss. Davis nodded thoughtfully. Maybe being observant is more important than being fast. At 4:33 a.m., exactly 7 hours after she had left, Emma Rodriguez walked back into the Millerville Evacuation Center. Jessica looked up from the radio equipment, relief flooding her face when she saw Emma and the two soldiers carrying emergency supplies. The batteries, Jessica exclaimed, grabbing the radio equipment as Corporal Davis handed over the power cells. We lost communication with Fort Mitchell 2 hours ago. Emma collapsed into a chair, her legs finally giving out after the 30-mile journey. She was exhausted, covered in mud and pine needles, and her throat was raw from breathing smoke. But for the first time since joining the army, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt valuable. Roberts and Kim gathered around her, their expressions mixing amazement and newfound respect. Rodriguez, Kim said quietly, that was incredible. You probably saved lives tonight. Emma looked around the evacuation center at the sleeping families, the elderly residents resting peacefully, the children who would wake up safe because communication had been restored with the firefighting units. She thought about her father's words. Courage wasn't about being the fastest or strongest. It was about never giving up. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over Millerville. The wildfire was still burning, but it was now under control. The evacuation center was secure, supplied, and in communication with emergency services, and Private Emma Rodriguez, the soldier everyone had called to slow, had proven that sometimes the most important victories come not from speed, but from determination, observation, and the courage to keep moving when others might quit. Emma's story wasn't over yet. The most surprising twist was still to come. 3 days later, back at Fort Mitchell, Emma Rodriguez sat in Lieutenant Colonel Stone's office, still trying to process everything that had happened. The wildfire had been contained, all civilians had been safely evacuated, and Squad Delta had received commendations for their performance during the emergency. But Emma sensed there was more to this meeting than a simple debriefing. Lieutenant Colonel Stone began, studying a file on her desk. I've been reviewing your performance records, and I have some questions. Emma's heart sank. Even after everything that had happened in Millerville, she assumed she was about to be criticized for her slow running times and poor physical fitness scores. Ma'am, I know my running times aren't. Colonel Stone held up a hand to stop her. Actually, that's exactly what I want to discuss. I've been looking at your training records from the past 6 months, and something doesn't add up. Emma felt confused. Ma'am, Colonel Stone opened the file and spread several documents across her desk. Your initial fitness assessment when you arrived at Fort Mitchell showed excellent cardiovascular health. Your heart rate, lung capacity, and muscle efficiency were all above average. Yet your running times have been consistently poor since basic training. Emma stared at the medical reports, not understanding what Colonel Stone was suggesting. Furthermore, Colonel Stone continued, I spoke with Staff Sergeant Santos about your performance in Millerville. She said you maintained a steady pace for 7 hours, covering 30 miles of difficult terrain while carrying supplies and leading other soldiers. That level of endurance is exceptional, not poor. A terrible suspicion began forming in Emma's mind. Ma'am, are you saying? I'm saying that someone has been sabotaging your training records. Colonel Stone's voice was cold and professional, but Emma could hear the anger underneath. I ordered a full investigation after Millerville, and we discovered some very interesting things. Colonel Stone pulled out another document. Sergeant Thompson has been falsifying your running times on his reports. Your actual times have been consistently average to above average, but he's been recording them as much slower. Emma felt the world spinning around her, but why would he do that? We're still investigating his motives, but it appears Sergeant Thompson has a history of targeting female soldiers he considers unsuitable for combat roles. He's done this before at other bases. The office door opened, and Captain Harrison entered, his face grim. Emma expected him to support Sergeant Thompson, but instead, he looked directly at her with what appeared to be shame. Rodriguez, Captain Harrison said quietly, I owe you an apology. I trusted Sergeant Thompson's assessments without conducting my own investigation. That was my failure as an officer. Emma's mind raced as she processed this information. All those months of humiliation, all the cruel nicknames, all the times she had doubted herself, it had been based on lies. There's more, Colonel Stone continued. We also discovered that Sergeant Thompson had been sabotaging your equipment during training exercises. The malfunctioning radio during your first tactical exercise, the torn pack straps that slowed you down during the obstacle course, these weren't accidents. Emma thought about all the times she had blamed herself for equipment failures. All the moments she had wondered if she was really cut out for military service. The anger that rose in her chest was unlike anything she had ever felt. Where is Sergeant Thompson now? She asked. He's been relieved of duty and is facing court-martial proceedings, Colonel Stone replied. His actions violated multiple military regulations and endangered soldiers under his command. Captain Harrison stepped forward. Rodriguez, I know an apology isn't enough, but I want you to know that your real performance records show you're exactly the kind of soldier the Army needs. Your attention to detail, your persistence, your ability to find solutions under pressure, these are exceptional qualities. Emma sat in silence for a moment, processing everything she had learned. Part of her felt vindicated, even triumphant, but another part felt a deep sadness for all the self-doubt she had endured, all the times she had questioned her father's words about courage and determination. What happens now? She asked finally. Colonel Stone smiled, the first time Emma had ever seen her do so. Now, you get the career you deserve. I'm recommending you for advanced training in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Your ability to observe details and navigate difficult terrain makes you ideal for specialized operations. Also, Captain Harrison added, we're offering you the opportunity to transfer to any unit you choose, after what you've been through. Here, we'd understand if you wanted a fresh start somewhere else. Emma thought about this offer. She could leave Fort Mitchell, go somewhere new where nobody knew about Turtle Rodriguez or her struggles. She could start over with a clean slate, but then she thought about Jessica Walsh, who had stood by her when others hadn't. She thought about Robertson Kim, who had seen her true capabilities during the Millerville emergency. She thought about all the other soldiers at Fort Mitchell who might benefit from having someone around who understood what it felt like to be underestimated. With respect, ma'am, Emma said, I'd like to stay at Fort Mitchell. This is where I learned who I really am. I'd like to help make sure no other soldier goes through what I experienced. Colonel Stone nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. We need officers who understand that true strength comes in many forms. 3 months later, newly promoted Corporal Emma Rodriguez stood in front of a group of new recruits, teaching a class on land navigation and tactical awareness. Among the young soldiers sitting before her was a shy young woman who reminded Emma of herself, someone who looked uncertain, someone who might not believe in her own capabilities yet. After class, the young woman approached Emma nervously. Corporal Rodriguez, I heard about what you did in Millerville, how you outran time itself to save those people, but I also heard that you used to be, that you had trouble keeping up with the others. Emma smiled, remembering her father's words about courage. The most important thing I learned is that being slow doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the person who takes their time, who pays attention to details, who never gives up, sometimes that person is exactly who you need when everything falls apart. The young woman looked hopeful. Do you really think so? I know so, Emma replied. And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, you tell them about the soldier who was too slow to quit, and saved 300 lives because of it. Outside the classroom window, Emma could see other soldiers going through their morning runs. Some were fast, some were slow, some were struggling to keep up. But now Emma knew something she hadn't understood before. In the end, it wasn't about who finished first, it was about who was still running when it mattered most. The nickname Turtle was still used around Fort Mitchell sometimes, but now it was said with respect, even admiration. Because everyone knew the story of the soldier who had been called too slow right up until the moment she outran disaster itself to bring hope to those who needed it most. And in the end, that was the fastest thing of all.